In this video, we're going to start building some functionality behind our buttons to add, edit, and delete our cars from our database. Before I continue though, I want to show you some change that I made here to the grid view, where we were filling our grid view with the custom model or a collection or a list of the custom model coming from our database for the make, model, VIN, year, and license plate number. And the column for license plate number would have displayed this in camel case, which is undesirable to me in terms of presentation. So what I did was to go underneath and actually set a custom header text for the fourth or the fifth column that would have been in our grid view. So remember that this would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the fourth one would have gotten the custom header text. All right. So in order to put in some functionality, first we need to understand the behavior that we're aiming for, at least or that I'm aiming for. The behavior I'm expecting is that a user would select a column and then click edit car, or they would just click add new car, and a new window comes up allowing them to fill out the form, click submit, and we're going to make at least the make and the model and let's say the license plate number mandatory. So, you can customize your own validations, but I'm going to put in some amount of validation in that form. If they select a row and then click edit, then the expectation is that a window similar to the add new car window will pop up, allowing them to modify the details of whatever record they selected. And then when they click submit or to save changes, it will update that in the database. In a similar fashion, when they select a row and then click delete, we want to, ask them, are they sure what they want to delete? And if they proceed to click yes, then we proceed to delete the car. So in this video, we're going to be looking at a few things where we're going to be creating a new form, and then we'll be looking at constructor overloading as to how we can pass values into a form so that this form will load with a set of values. So in this situation, we're actually going to use the same form for the add new car and the edit, because it's the same set of fields. We're building one form, and then we look at passing values in as at the time of loading so that we get different outcomes from the same form and different functionality. Now I'm going to make some modifications to my grid view. The first thing I'm going to do is include the ID. So we did build the custom model. We said make model, all the things that we want to display to the user are all here. And you notice that they're kind of grayed out. So if you hover over it, the light bulb is really telling you that since the custom name that we're giving it is the same as the actual column name, then we really don't need to say make equals the same column name. So if you just click the lightning bolt and use its suggestion, then you'll see that it just replaces it and say that you could just reference it as make, right? So you could go through and clean it up if you want, but I'm going to leave it as it is now so that it's clear what exactly is happening. The modification I want to make, however, is to add the ID, because when I select a row and then I want to click edit, I need to know what row I'm selecting. And the best way to know what row I'm selecting or what car I'm selecting is to know the ID of that vehicle, right? So the same way that we needed the ID when we were saving it in add car into our record, remember that we had to bind the value member of ID. I need a way to find that value member in from my grid, so that when I click edit, I can do a lookup for that particular car based on its unique identifier, which is the ID, and then return that data to the form so that it can be up for editing. So what I'm going to do is just continue underneath license plate number, and then I'm just going to say q.id. So I could say id is equal to q.id, but then the lightning bulb would once again appear telling me that this is redundant, so I don't need to say the id is equal to the same column name. So just to drive my point home or to appease Visual Studio, I'm just going to say q.id just to show that I didn't have to specify a column name all the time, right? So I'm including q.id into the data set that is being returned, which means that my data grid is going to definitely generate a column for the ID, which I don't necessarily want because I don't need to see the ID column. So what I'm going to do is underneath where I set the header text for the license plate number, I'm going to say gv vehicle list dot columns, and then I can specify that I want the 5th column, or the 6th column, or column with the subscript 5, which would represent my ID. I want its visibility to be set to false, right? So even though it's there, it won't show up, but I know it's there, and I'm setting it there because I know that when I need the value from it, I can get that value. So I'm putting it there, but I'm making it hidden. All right. So let's go ahead and prepare our add edit form. So I'm just going to right click my project, add a new form. I'm going to call this one add edit vehicles, or add edit vehicle. And then that's my new form. So I'm going to explore some new editing techniques in this one. So the first thing I want to do is change the title. So I want to, well, I'm actually going to set the title on the fly. So I'm going to show you guys that a lot of these things can be controlled from the code behind at the time, as at runtime, right? So I'm using it for two purposes, adding and editing. But when it is going to be time to add something, I want it to say add vehicle. When I want to edit, I want it to say edit vehicle. What I don't want is for it to say add edit vehicle, right? So I'm going to show you how you can set that during runtime. Another thing that we want to look at in this is the power of layout. So if I go to my toolbox and I go to the containers section, then I'll see that I have a few layouts. You have the flow panel, which kind of takes things and stacks them side by side automatically. You have the group box, which is usually used like when you have radio buttons and check boxes that you want to associate with each other. You have a panel, you have the split container, you have tab controls, and you have table layout panel. So I'm going to borrow the table layout here, drag it over, and draw it over the section that I want it. And you notice that it's just one big box, right? One big grid box. So what I intend to do here is put the labels to the left and the controls to the right. So I can actually resize this, and you notice that the grid, the cells actually resize accordingly. I have about, let me check my database. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fields that need to be filled. So I need at least 5 rows. So using the black caret at the top right hand corner, I can add rows, I can add columns as I need to, and I can also edit the rows and columns. So I'm going to add a few rows. And like I said, I need 5. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have 1 extra. I can remove the last, sorry, that was the column. Let me just undo that quickly. All right, so I'm going to remove the last row actually. And then you notice that, sizing is not so keen. So you can always just drag and resize as you see fit. And this may still not work out to be the best. So you can actually just go to edit, rows and columns, and then you can say the type of sizing you want for your columns. And you can use the drop down at the top and say rows, and you can choose the sizing you want for your rows. So you can see that you have percentage and you have absolute. So I'm going to select all, and then I'm going to say I want all of them to be 50%. Then I click OK. You see that everything kind of normalizes. And if I expand, they all kind of expand with that, right? So that's my table layout. And then I'm going to drop in the add button. So I just bring over my button, click OK. And then I want my button to say save changes, right? So I have one button that says save changes, and I'm going to put that one to the left. And then I'm going to have another button that is going to say cancel. And that one I'm putting to the right. So, we're just building this out. You may have different design ideas from me, and that's fine. That's actually excellent if you're thinking differently from me. But if you're not, then that's fine too. We're in this together. So I'm just collapsing this a bit. And then I'm going to put in our our label. So we know that every form we try to put a label at the top, and then I'm going to make this label say add or edit new car. So add new car, right? Or actually, I'm going to leave this label blank, and better yet, I'm going to make it say what I want it to say based on the mode. So I'm going to just change its name so that I know the control from the code behind. So I'm going to call this LBL title. All right, so even your labels, yes, we weren't really naming labels because we didn't necessarily need to call them from the code behind, but I want to call this one and I want to fill the content relative to the mode that this form is in, right? So once again, I'm creating a form. I'm calling it add edit vehicle. This form is going to have the dual purpose of providing fields for adding a car versus editing a car, right? And adding and editing are pretty much the same operations. Well, at least the same fields are involved in both operations. So in the toolbox, I'm just going to take over a few labels, drag them, drop them inside of these rows. So you may have, it may get annoying trying to put them in. So I'm just pasting so that all of them go into the left-hand side. And then I'll just delete the extra ones from the right-hand side because I don't really want them there. And then I'll drag over the text boxes. So everything here is really a text box anyway. Right, so text box inside of that one. And I'm just pasting. So I'm filling out all of these with text boxes, then I modify my labels. So the first label would be for the make of the car. The second label would be for let me just right click properties and let me pin properties so I can move a bit faster. So the other one would be for the model. And then, in a real world situation, you probably want to give them drop-down lists for make and model because you don't want them to be typing in Honda without an H or Toyota and spelling it with an extra A, stuff like that. So you probably want to give them drop-downs. But for the simplicity of these examples and these lessons, I'm not going to go into all of that. I just want us to have some key concepts under our grasp. So the next one would be the VIN. The next label would be our license or our year rather. And then the final one would be the license plate number. All right. So all I did was click each label, change the property for the text. If you want, you can make them bigger and more pronounced. That's fine. I'm just going to leave those that way for now. All right. And then we have the respective text boxes to get the values for each. Now let's go over to the code file and start adding some code that will make our form a bit more dynamic. So as is typical, we have our class, we have the name of the form inheriting from a base class called form, and then we have our base constructor, which is initializing the components, right? Now in this base constructor, I can actually start setting other things. So I want to maybe set the title. So if this constructor or the form is loaded using this constructor, then I want the title text to say add new vehicle. All right. And then maybe I want I could change the button text also. So as I said before, we want to make sure that we put names to our controls. So I actually skipped that step. So let's go back and put names to our controls properly so that we don't have any problems moving forward. So our text box one is really TB make, right? So it's the text box for the make of the vehicle. We have the second one being TB model. We have the third one being TB VIN. We have the fourth one being TB year. And then this one is TB license plate number. So TB license, and I'll just shorten this and say license num, right? And then for our buttons, I'm going to have BTN save, right? And then for cancel, I'm going to have BTN cancel. And then while I'm here, I'm just going to set up those click events. So btn save click event and btn cancel click event. Once again, to create those, you just double click the control and it will generate the click event. Now back in our code file, I'm going to create a second controller. So this is what we call overriding, right? Or overloading. So we have this concept in programming called function overloading. And in OOP, you can actually overload constructors, right? So we have a constructor that's taking 0 parameters. I'm going to overload this constructor and I'm going to want it to take a parameter of type of car. And then I'm going to call it car. Right? Or you know what, I'm going to be very specific and I'm going to say car to edit so that we know exactly the purpose of this property, right? So car to edit, right? So when we load the form with this constructor, we're expected to pass in an object of types of car, and then we will then use it to fill out the data points in the text boxes as they are there already, right? So of course, if I'm loading the form, then I need initialize component, so that has to be there. I'm also going to take the part where I'm setting the title. So if it's loaded with this one, which is for the edit mode, then I'm going to say edit vehicle, right? So if we load the form using this constructor, it's to add a new vehicle. If I load the form using the second constructor, which is the overload, then it is to edit said vehicle. Further to setting the title for the editing, what I'm going to do is create a function called populate fields. All right. So the cool thing about Visual Studio is that I can write the function call. I don't have a function called populate fields. I just wrote it. And then you see the lightning bolt is coming up with an red X and it's asking me, do you want to generate the method for this? So if I click that, then it automatically just generates that method for me, right? So it makes coding much more efficient than it could be otherwise, right? So inside of populate fields, I'm going to be setting the field values to whatever the matching field value is coming over from this object. So actually, I'm going to pass this object into populate fields. So I'm passing types of car into that. And I'm going to make sure that this function also knows of the incoming data, right? So I could just call this car, just to show you that once again, I'm getting a property, or I'm getting an object of types of car, right? So this represents the data from the database, and this is the object that has the data that we're going to be editing in the form, right? And then I'm getting it in this constructor. I'm initializing my components. I'm setting the title of the whole form to be edit vehicle, and then I'm saying I want to start populating the fields in the form. Here is the data. So inside of the actual function populate fields, I'm getting that object. So I'm just calling it car just to show you that it doesn't necessarily have to have the same name. It must, however, have the same data type, because if I said int here, then that would cause an error in the function call, because then it's saying, well, passing some invalid data type. So the data type has to match. The name doesn't necessarily have to match. And then what I'm going to be doing inside populate fields is calling each text box. So if I say TB, let's start from the top, make dot text, right, is going to be equal to the object coming in dot, and then the corresponding data that text box should have. So I can do that for every one of them. TB model dot text is equal to car dot model. All right, so you can pause here and try and do them all on your own. I'm just going to finish them up. All right, so if you paused and tried it on your own, then you would have something looking like this. If you have an error trying to put the year into the text box, then remember that you need to make it a string in order for it to go into the text of the text box, right? So once again, we're saying that we can load this form normally, right? Or we can decide to call the constructor with some data, push some data to this constructor version of the form, and then that constructor will proceed to populate the fields with some data. I'm also going to introduce a private property, and I'm going to call this one IsEditMode. So I'm just using this flag, which is a Boolean, IsEditMode, right? And I'm not even going to initialize it just yet. I'm just declaring it. And then if it is the constructor without initial data, then I know that I'm not in edit mode. So I'm going to say IsEditMode is equal to false, right? So it gets initialized right there. And if it's the constructor with data, then I know IsEditMode is equal to true. So pretty much I'm going to be using this flag inside of my btn save so I can determine the behavior, because it's a different kind of query if I'm inserting data versus if I'm updating data. So I'm just going to track the value of IsEditMode. By the time the button save is clicked, I would know if it's edit mode or not. If it's edit mode, then I do an edit query. If it's not edit mode, then I do an add query. That's pretty much all that I need to do. Now in my btn save button click event, what we're going to do is do like a quick if statement. So I'm just saying if IsEditMode, and remember that when we in C# we can write this in shorthand, and this really translates to if IsEditMode is equivalent to true. That's really what that is asking, right? So if IsEditMode, then we want to do something else, we want to do something else. So if it is edit mode, then we want to write edit code here. And if it is not edit mode, then we write add code here. All right, so I'm just going to leave those commented for now. And then the cancel click is pretty much just going to close the window. So if I click cancel, the expectation is that this window will close. So I can actually just say in the btn cancel click, I can just say this dot close. All right. So remember that this keyword is special and specific to the actual class. It's just an object of the class that it is being used in. So this represents the add edit vehicle window. And then the dot close is the opposite of the dot show. So dot show shows the window, dot close closes the window. So if I click cancel, then just close the window. That's pretty much all we're saying. And then you notice that Visual Studio is actually graying out this. So it's not every time that you actually need to use the word this. So you could actually just say close, and it will know that it needs to close itself. Now we're making good progress. I'm not quite ready to code the edit and the add functionality yet. I'm instead going to go back over to my manage vehicle listing window, and we can just take a quick look at that design once again. And we have the add new car button and we have the edit car button. The expectation is that when they click add new car, we're going to show a new form. So I'm just going to do that. So when they click that, I'm going to say I'm going to say add edit vehicle, and I'm just going to call it FRM. So, or I can just use the suggestion from Visual Studio, and then I'm going to say is equal to a new instance of add edit vehicle. Once again, we could always simplify this by saying var, if anything, and then I'm just going to say add edit vehicle dot show. So it's just going to show that new window. And of course, we want the MDI parent, because we don't want to just show this. Remember that when we just show the window, it's a free window to do anything. So I want it to know that its parent is the main window. So I'm going to have to write this code a bit differently, where I'm going to say that the add edit object dot MDI parent is equal to, and then I'm going to have to say this dot MDI parent. So let me explain exactly what is happening here. Remember that we're launching manage vehicle listing from inside of our main window. Main window is our MDI parent. So when the manage vehicle listing window would have launched, it would have launched inside of main window. It would know that main window is its MDI parent, right? Now I want to launch another window on the command of the manage vehicle listing, which is a child of main window. So I needed to know that it is also a child of main window. In the previous ones, we would have said that when you launch, and let me just get back to my main window code so you can, be reacquainted with it. When we were launching manage vehicle listing, we said that this is the MDI parent, this being main window. In this situation, main window is not the one doing the launching. So I can't say this is the main window, because then that would make manage vehicle listing the parent for my add edit window, which would be wrong. So instead I'm saying this, which represents the manage vehicle listing, dot MDI parent, which represents main window. I'm saying that whatever the MDI parent is of this form, that is the parent for the add edit vehicle. All right, so that's all I'm doing in that line. So, situationally, you just have to know how to maneuver, all right? In some situations, it's this because the MDI parent is making a direct call. Sometimes that child of the MDI parent is making that direct call. So you just need to say whoever my parent is, that's also your parent. So that's all we're doing in this line. I'm saying that my parent is your parent. And then we're showing that window. All right. So this is loading our add edit vehicle using the normal constructor. In other button click events, especially like in the edit now, we'll need to retrieve the data of the car to be edited and then pass that data over to the form, right? So once again, the expected behavior is that the person is going to click the row in the grid, and then click edit, right? So firstly, we need to know what row was clicked, or at least the value or the ID value of the row that is clicked and selected. So here I just outlined some of the steps that we need to take when we click the edit button. So one, we need to get the ID of the selected row, right? So when the person clicks the row and then clicks edit, we need to know what is the ID of that row, right? After getting the ID of the row, then we need to query our database, which means that we need to initiate, okay, we have DB already, so we have a connection to the database already active because, well, that's how we fill the grid. So we already have that object. So we need to query the database for the record associated with that ID. And then we need to launch our window, similar to what we did here, except we're going to be launching it with the data. So remember once again that we have two constructors. We have a normal constructor that doesn't expect much. It just knows it's supposed to add. And then we have one that is expecting some data to be passed in. And that is the one that we're going to be using when we're going to be launching for editing purposes. All right. So let's start by getting the ID of the selected row. So I'm going to say var ID lowercase is equal to, and then I'm going to call my grid, which I call GV vehicle list. And then I have a property that says selected rows, but then notice it's selected rows because that's actually a collection. See there? It's a selected row collection because maybe the person can select more than one rows, right? But we're expecting that it's only one row that they're going to select, and it's even if they select more than one, we only want the first one, right? So this is a wild assumption. We can code defensively in the future, but right now I'm just keeping it simple. So out of the selected rows, I want the first one. So it's a collection. I can use my square bracket, specify that I want the first one. Then I say dot. Then I want of that row, we have cells. Cells represent the columns, right? So I want the cells, but then of the cells, which is also a collection, I'm really only interested in the one called ID. Let me hide the property so we have more room to write the code, right? So I can use a named index. So in some situations, you want the number. Some situations, you just want to specify the name of the column, because if I add more columns here, I can't go by numbers, right? I would have to change my code every time. So what I'm going to do here is say, I want the cell with the name ID, right? And then after getting that cell, I want the value in that cell. So all it's going to do is say, give me the first selected row, and then give me the cell called ID and whatever the value is, even though it's not visible because we hid it, but whatever that value is, I want to store it inside of this variable called ID. Now that we know the ID of the row that was selected, I can say var car, because now I only want one, is equal to underscore db dot the table that I intend to get the car from, which is the types of cars, dot, and then now we're going to look at another function in LINQ called first or default, right? First or default, we have first and we have first or default. So the difference is that first will fail if it doesn't bring back anything. Default will fail gracefully and give you a nice sensible error message, or just return null. So I want the first or default, and then I'm going to do what we'll have come to love now, a lambda expression. So I'm going to say Q, then my arrow. Then all I'm saying is give me the first or default. Pretty much this is like a where clause, where Q dot, and then you see that the Q is giving me access to all of the columns. I'm interested in the ID column, where the value in the ID column is equivalent to the ID that we just retrieved from our selected grid. All right. So all this is going to do is run it. Oh, and it's giving me an error here because ID is actually an object. All right. So what I would want to do here is probably just do an implicit parsing to an int. All right. So now this is returning an int into ID. And then I'm comparing the integer column to the integer value coming back from this operation. Now that we've gotten the car, so it's either we get a car or we get null. That's what first or default means, right? And the assumption is that if they're clicking the grid, then that ID is in the database. And then we go on to launch our form with the data. So I'm going to also say var, and I'm going to use the same object name, and because they're in different functions, they won't, interfere with each other. But then this one is going to be equal to a new instance of add edit vehicle, but then I'm passing in the data that is coming back from the database in the form of car. All right. So I'm going to launch a new instance of this window or this form, passing in the data coming from the database, and then I can just copy these two lines where I'm setting the MDI parent and I'm setting it to show. So you can see that they're doing similar things, except edit is a bit more work because to edit, you have to do a lookup for the ID or for the record to be edited, and then you can pass it on into the new window, right? So when it passes into the new window, I'll just go back over there. It's going to launch with this constructor, which is, this constructor, which is initializing the component, setting a different text, setting the edit mode to be true, and then populating the fields so that when the form loads, it will load with all of those values already in the text boxes. Now back in our manage vehicle listing, I'm just going to top it all off and do the delete click event, which is going to do a similar thing. They select the grid. So we need the ID of the selected value from the grid. I'm going to reuse this code. And then I need to do a lookup for that vehicle, right? So I do the same thing there, but then this time I'm going to delete vehicle from table, right? So after I get the vehicle that is being referenced by that selected row, then I'm going to say underscore db dot types of cars dot remove this time. So when we're inserting data, we do add. When we're removing, we say dot remove. And then I'm going to pass in whatever it is I want to remove, which is the car that we just did a lookup for. And then after all of that, I'm just going to say db dot save changes. All right. So when we select something from the grid and then we click delete car or the delete button, it will then remove. And then I'm going to do one more thing where I say that the grid view should refresh, right? So I'm just going to refresh the grid view after this has occurred. Now back in our add edit form, the first thing I want is my connection to the database. So I'm just going to copy the existing code because once again, I want to keep it consistent this time around. So I'm just going to copy this and bring it over. And then I'm going to do the respective initialization. So this might be like a double step at this point, and you're saying, well, I don't really want to do it this way. And that's fine. If you can find a more efficient way, you feel free to let me know. I mean, there are more efficient ways. I'm not saying there isn't a more efficient way, but if you feel free to let me know if you do it a different way, right? You could actually just do it in one line, just like this, and cut out the double work, right? So you could do it that way and have it initialize all in one line. That's fine. But I'm just going to leave it like this since that's a pattern that we've been using up until now. So after initializing it, what I'm going to do is go ahead and write in the code for the editing, right? So after we click save, what we need to do is to build a model that represents what was edited. And an important thing to note is that when we're editing, we need to keep track of the ID of the record that's being edited. So we have skipped that step because here I set all of the text boxes to have the values. What I did not set was a value for the object being edited. So, you know, sometimes you do something, you make a decision, and then you realize later on that you missed a step. So that's part of the development process. So I'm going back to my design. I'm going to my toolbox. I'm bringing over a label, and I'm just going to call this label. I'm going to blank out the text. I'm also going to make it not visible. So I'm going to change the property visible to false. I'm also going to change its name to LBLID, right? So that I know exactly what to call it in the code behind. So one of the first things I'm going to set is actually the text for LBLID. So LBLID.text is equal to car.id, right? So we're getting the car object and ID is coming over. Oh, so it's saying I can't, that's a string, so I have to do a toString because I'm storing it inside of a text variable, right? Or instead of a string variable. So that's all I'm doing. I'm just setting a label to have the ID being tracked so that I know exactly what ID belonged to the record that was being updated. Now that I have all the data that I need, what I'm going to do firstly is look up the record that was being edited. So like I said, you always have to do these lookups. So that is why it was important for us to track the ID, because at the time of us clicking save, I can get the ID from my form. So I can say var ID is equal to, and then I can get it from the label.text, which we know is a string. So that's a string. I want a integer variable, or an integer value rather. So I'm going to have to do an int.parse. I can't do the implicit conversion because that doesn't work when it's a string being converted, right? So I can just int.parse what is in my ID label and store it inside of that. And then I can do a lookup for the car where I say var car is equal to, and I'm sure you're just completing my sentence or typing it out before I do, where I say db.typesofcars.first or default. So anytime you want one record, you can use first or default. Get our Lambda expression up and running, and then say q.id is equivalent to the ID we just got back from our form. Now we have our car object, and we are not entirely sure what was edited because we have 5 fields, 5 text boxes. We don't know if they were populated, if the values were deleted. We don't know as yet. So what I'm going to do is just say car dot, and then say for each one of them, car.model is equal to the text that is inside of tbModel.text. the TB model text box, right? And pretty much that's all I'm going to do for all of them. So car.make is equal to whatever value is in TB make dot text, right? And I'm going to continue doing that for all of them. So you can pause here and finish them. You'll find that as you go along, you may have to do quite a few data conversions to and from. So up top, we have to convert from integer to string to get it into the text box. And then below, we have to convert from string into integer to get it back into the database. After filling out all of the properties or probable values, so the only one I'm not setting is ID. I don't need to set the ID because the whole operation is based on the fact that the ID is the same and the ID would not have changed, right? After doing all of that, I would just say db.save changes. And then this would submit all of the potentially new values, even if they're old values. So even if there was no real change made, it would submit all of those to the database for our new car. Now, a similar operation would be done for adding. So I'm just going to do adding quickly, where I'm going to build a car model. So I would say something like var new car is equal to a new instance of type of or types. Type this out, types of car. So remember that this represents our new table, right? So we did something similar to this with our car rental record, where we built the car rental record. Now we're just building a new type of car record or types of cars record. So we say new types of car, and then I'm going to show you a cool feature that C# does, where it allows us to just use our curly braces and fill out the column names in one good sweep, in one full sweep, right? So I'm initializing my object to a new instance of my table to be populated, and then I can fill out each column. So I can say the license plate number is equal to whatever value is coming back from the license plate text box. So I'm just going to copy and paste so I can move more quickly. And then make is equal to whatever value is coming from the text box for the make. And notice that they're all comma separated. Model is equal to the text box tb.model.text, right? And then we just go along and fill each one out. And I'm just shortcutting it here so I can move a bit more quickly. tbvin.text and year. Well, year would now have the int.parse, right? So I can just copy that because the code already exists. So now that we've filled out a new record for types of car, in order to add it to the database, you know that we need to say underscore db dot find our table dot add. And then I'm going to pass in my new model, which is new car. Right? And then at the end of any operation like this, we always need to save changes. And that's it. So if they click button save and we're in edit mode, then we will change the save the changes made to an existing record. So we do a lookup based on the ID, and then we submit the changes to that record that we looked up, and then we save the changes. And then if we're adding a new car, meaning we're not in edit mode, then we create a new model of the table type or the class type to be added to the tables, right? We fill it with the data, and then we add it to the collection of records, and then save changes. Now we can test our changes, test all of the code that we've written. And I click start, so I go over to my manage vehicle listing, and you can see that I already took the liberty of editing one of them before. So let's just look at this experience. Let's start with adding a new car. So when I click add new car, I can now add a new Rolls Royce, and let's say that the make would be Phantom. The VIN is 123456. It is 2018, and then the license plate number would be HG5647, right? Then we click save changes. So I click save changes, the window is still open, but then if you notice that the label is saying add new vehicle because we clicked add, so it's setting the title well. We didn't say that anything else should happen after it save changes. So those are some refinements that we need to make as we go along, right? So the window is still up, that's 1. And 2, the grid is not showing any changes. So if I close this window and then I close the grid and then reopen it, however, you see that it runs a fresh query, bringing back our newly added vehicle. So that's something that we have to look into, because we wouldn't want the user to have to go through all of that to see that they've added a new vehicle. We also didn't give them any visual prompt to say, hey, you've added a new vehicle successfully. So things like that. So that's with adding a vehicle. Let's look at editing. So I'm going to choose one of these existing ones. So buggy, we did say we were going to modify buggy a bit, and I'm going to edit this car. So the make is really Volkswagen, and it's a Beetle. The VIN, and then the year is let's say 1995, and then the plate number would be HY some random numbers. Save changes, same net effect, except that we're in edit mode this time. So you see that 1, it says edit vehicle, and then the expectation is that when I refresh the grid, buggy will now show different values. So once again, we didn't necessarily do a good job of handling the experience of moving between the windows. That can be fixed, but for now, just so that we can validate our changes, we can see that buggy is now showing our different values. So things that we need to do: 1, handling the experience having done an edit or an add. We need to close the window once the operation is done, show them a prompt to let them know it was successful, and also find a way to refresh the grid that is being displayed in the background. I think that's 3 objectives right there. Another thing that we want to do is add some validation and some error handling. So 1, you notice that if I click ladder and click edit car, and then let's say, okay, I made 1 change here, and I click save changes, it's going to bomb out and give us one of those little nasty errors, which we call exceptions, which we've been through before. It's important to handle exceptions. So that's another thing you can go ahead and add to your form to make sure that it handles these kinds of errors gracefully. All right, so there are a few places. So in every single click event, I would suggest that you put a error handling, a try-catch statement, to try and catch those errors and display appropriate error messages without ending the runtime of the program. So I'm going to leave you guys to do that. This was a very long video. We did quite a bit. So I'm going to leave you guys to try and experiment with those validations and those exception handling. I'm going to stop recording right here, and I will do them off screen, and in the next video we can review them together.